I think most of you use Instagram nowadays. It's like it's impossible to escape it, you know? Whether you have thousands of followers or almost none, everyone seems to be on there. I'm not a famous person or anything, but back when this happened, I had about 300 followers. For someone like me living in a small rural town in the US, that was actually quite a bit. Around here, we don't know many people outside of our small circles. That night, I was watching a movie at home, just relaxing after an ordinary day. My phone buzzed, and I saw that someone named Emma Harper started following me on Instagram. I was curious, so I opened the app to check out her profile. She was gorgeous, you know? Blonde hair, a smile that seemed to light up the screen. She had around 5,000 followers and about 50 photos, all posted on pretty spaced-out dates, which made her account look very authentic. I always check out the profile of anyone who follows me, just to make sure they're not some bot or something. Her photos had hundreds of likes and a lot of comments from guys drooling over her, leaving hearts and love emojis. I found myself scrolling through her profile even before deciding whether to follow her back. Then, while I was looking through the photos, she sent me a direct message. "Hey, I don't usually do this, but I think you're really handsome." I was surprised, but honestly, I get messages like that from time to time. I don't want to sound full of myself, but some girls have sent me DMs before. I followed her back and replied with something like, "I think you're beautiful too." The conversation flowed like we'd known each other for a while. We talked about hobbies, school, and even our workout routines. She seemed really into fitness, just like me. Before I knew it, she gave me her number and we planned to meet the next night. It was Friday and we agreed to meet at a bar called Lucky's for a few drinks. At that point, I was excited. I'd never gone out with someone I met on Instagram, but this girl seemed too perfect to be true. And maybe that was exactly what made everything feel so strange. When Friday finally came around, I was a nervous wreck. I don't know why, but there was something off about this situation. Maybe it was because I'd never arranged a date directly from Instagram before, or maybe it was just that Emma Harper seemed too good to be real. I spent a while getting ready. I picked my best shirt, that cologne that always gets compliments, and took a last look in the mirror before heading out. My heart was racing, but it was that good kind of nervousness, you know? The one you feel before something exciting happens. I drove to Lucky's and arrived about 15 minutes early. The parking lot was nearly full, as usual for a Friday night, but I decided to wait in the car. I was checking Instagram and messaging some friends to pass the time. Finally, my phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "Hey, my car broke down. Can you come pick me up?" I read the message a few times. It was weird, but not exactly alarming. Stuff like that happens, right? I decided to try calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. That made me a little uneasy, but I kept telling myself it was just a signal issue or something. I replied with a simple, "Where are you?" and waited. A few minutes later, she sent another message with directions to where she was. It was a secondary road a bit out of town. It wasn't exactly somewhere you'd expect someone to be driving at night, but again, it wasn't completely unusual either. Before leaving, I checked her Instagram profile again, just to make sure everything seemed legit, and it did. She had friends tagged in her photos, genuine comments. Nothing looked fake. I took a deep breath, texted that I was on my way, and started the car. As I drove through the quiet, dark streets of town, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. But at the same time, I didn't want to seem paranoid. After all, she seemed so real, so normal. As I got closer to the location Emma Harper had described, the road started getting more deserted. The streetlights had disappeared a few miles back, and now all that surrounded me were dense trees on both sides of the road. The only sound was the hum of my car's engine and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. I was starting to wonder why she'd be driving in such an isolated area, but I tried to push those negative thoughts aside. Maybe it was just a shortcut to wherever she was going. After all, things like that happen. Then I finally saw her car, or at least what I assumed was her car. It was a black Nissan Altima parked on the shoulder with the hood up. There was something off about it, but again, I tried not to overthink it. I parked my car on the opposite side of the road and turned off the engine. I grabbed my phone and tried calling her again, but as before, it went straight to voicemail. I sighed, got out of the car, and started walking toward the Nissan. When I got closer, I noticed the windows were completely tinted like they'd been dyed or something. I couldn't see anything inside. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. I knocked lightly on the driver's side window. Nothing. No movement, no sound. I waited a few seconds and tried again, this time calling her name. "Emma, are you there?" Still nothing. The silence around me seemed to grow, making the moment feel even more uncomfortable. I decided to walk around the car, thinking maybe she was trying to fix the engine. But when I looked under the hood, nothing seemed to have been touched. No tools, no obvious attempt to fix anything. By now, I was starting to feel really uneasy. I grabbed my phone again and texted her, "Emma, where are you? I'm here, but I don't see you." As I walked back to the driver's side, something caught my eye. The window, which had been intact before, was now shattered. My eyes widened, and a cold chill ran down my spine. This didn't make sense. I had just passed by and knew the window had been fine. As I walked back to the driver's side, something caught my eye. The window, which had been intact before, was now shattered. My eyes widened and a cold chill ran down my spine. This didn't make sense. I had just passed by and knew the window had been fine. Suddenly, I saw something move inside the car. A hand, a strong, wrinkled male hand reaching out through the broken window. It motioned for me to come closer, as if calling me over. My heart raced. Something was terribly wrong. I instinctively took a step back, trying to process what was happening. With a trembling voice, I shouted, "Hey, who's there?" The hand kept waving slowly, deliberately. Fear took over me. This wasn't Emma. Whoever was inside that car was definitely not supposed to be there. Without thinking twice, I turned and ran back to my car. My body seemed to act on its own, driven by pure survival instinct. As soon as I got in the car, I started the engine and floored it, getting the hell out of there. As I drove, my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, or someone, following me. Fear coursed through my veins, and one question echoed in my mind. Who was that person, and what happened to Emma? It all started with an unexpected call from Michael Carter, my old college roommate. He sounded disturbed, almost desperate, when he asked me for a strange favor. Michael was organizing a charity event at an old house that had been temporarily donated for the occasion. He needed me to pick up some supplies from a storage unit on the other side of town. I had nothing important going on that night, so I agreed to help. I picked up the boxes from the storage unit and headed to the address he sent me. The house was in a secluded area, surrounded by tall, dark trees. When I parked, I noticed that the outdoor lights were off, leaving the place shrouded in an eerie twilight. I carried the boxes to the front door and knocked, but no one answered. I waited a few minutes, feeling the weight of the silence around me, and decided to call Michael. He picked up almost immediately, but his voice was oddly low, almost a whisper. "Did you arrive?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm outside. Where are you?" I replied. There was a pause on the other end before he said, "Come in, the door's unlocked. I'm on the second floor." Something about the way he said it made me uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. I pushed the door open. It was indeed unlocked, and stepped inside. The interior of the house was as dark as the outside. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, and the air smelled of mildew and old wood. I started up the stairs, carrying the boxes with me. The silence was overwhelming, and every step made the floorboards creak in an almost supernatural way. When I reached the second floor, I called out for Michael. "Michael, where are you?" He didn't respond, but I could hear a faint sound coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. I walked toward the sound, trying to stay calm. I slowly opened the door and found the room empty, except for an old chair in the middle and a large mirror leaning against the wall. That's when I heard Michael's voice again, but this time it didn't come from my phone. "Close the door and sit in the chair." "My name is Sarah, And like most people my age, I've always enjoyed sharing moments of my life on social media. My Instagram profile was public, with around 100 followers. I posted everything: outings with friends, family moments, and even random selfies. It wasn't uncommon to get likes and comments from people I didn't know, but one profile stood out to me, and not in a good way. It all started with a photo I posted at the beach. I was with my best friend Emma, wearing a simple swimsuit. Nothing special. Among the many comments I received, one in particular made me uncomfortable. Just 3 fire emojis from a profile of a man who seemed to be in his 40s or 50s. Curious, I clicked on his profile. He had only 3 photos posted, all selfies, about 80 followers, and he was following over 200 people, including me. It was weird but not uncommon, so I didn't pay much attention. From that moment on, he started interacting with almost every one of my posts. He would leave comments like beautiful or amazing, but always in a way that gave me chills. One day, he went further. I posted a photo of myself alone, and his comment read, "You look amazing in this pic. I'd kill to meet a girl like you." I felt uncomfortable, but I just replied with a thank you. In my mind, I thought ignoring it would be worse. Maybe he would give up. I never imagined that this small discomfort would escalate into something much darker. Things started to spiral in a way I never expected. 2 days after posting another photo, this time with my younger sister Lily, in front of our house, I received a direct message from him. It wasn't a public comment like before, it was personal, direct, and even more invasive. He wrote, "Hey, I just wanted to say you're beautiful even though I'm like 30 years older than you, lol." I responded politely but briefly just to end the conversation. "Lol, thanks." To my surprise, he kept going. "I'd kill to meet a girl like you." That sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just creepy, it was threatening in a way I couldn't explain. I waited 10 minutes before replying with a simple thanks, hoping he would take the hint and stop. But he didn't. He sent another message. "Maybe one day I'll meet you. Who knows? LOL." That comment made me shiver. The idea that he was suggesting we meet in person put me on high alert. Still, as strange as it was, I hesitated to block him. My logic at the time was simple, but silly. Why get rid of a follower who wasn't really doing anything? But the discomfort grew when, in my next post, he commented, "You and your sister are so cute." He was clearly watching every detail, analyzing every photo. That was the last straw. I deleted the comment, and finally decided to block him. But even so, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was like he was still there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to pop up again. That night, I started questioning whether I should be more careful about what I shared. After all, how far would someone go with this kind of obsession? I had no idea that the answer was much closer than I thought. That night, it was just me and Lily at home. It was one of those quiet nights, nothing out of the ordinary. I was in the bathroom painting my nails while Lily was in her room, probably watching something on her laptop. For a moment, I glanced out the bathroom window and noticed something strange. An unfamiliar car parked in front of our house. It was partially hidden by the bush separating our yard from the neighbors. The headlights were off, but I didn't see anyone get out. It was a black Maxima, and the sight unsettled me even though I tried to ignore it. We live on a cul-de-sac, a dead-end street, so we rarely see cars that aren't from residents or visitors. I closed the curtain, feeling a pang of paranoia, but decided to focus on my nails. When I finished, it was time to head out. I was going to a friend's house for a small gathering. I didn't tell Lily. We usually just text after we leave. I grabbed my purse, walked through the living room, and left through the front door. I walked to my car. I saw the Maxima again. The tinted windows reflected the dim streetlights, making it impossible to see who was inside. I quickly got in my car, trying to push away any scary thoughts, and drove off to the gathering. At my friend's house, I tried to relax, but I couldn't stop thinking about that car. The feeling that something was wrong followed me like a shadow. I stayed at the gathering for a few hours, avoiding drinking too much since I would need to drive back. When I finally got home, it was almost midnight. As I turned onto our street, my heart sank. The Maxima was still there. It hadn't moved an inch since I left. I drove slowly past it, trying to peek inside, but the darkness prevented me from seeing anything. I parked the car and texted a few friends to let them know I was home. With my phone in hand, I walked toward the door, keeping my eyes on the car the whole time. When I reached the doormat, I dropped my keys on the ground. My heart raced. I was so scared that for a moment, I hesitated to bend down and pick them up. Instead, I rang the doorbell repeatedly, hoping Lily would come downstairs to open the door. But she didn't. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and finally bent down to grab the keys. I quickly opened the door and stepped inside, locking it behind me. I took one last look at the Maxima before closing the curtain. The house was eerily quiet, but I assumed Lily was in her room. I went upstairs, my heart still racing, and walked down the hallway. Her door was open, but the lights were off. "Lily?" I called, but there was no answer. I entered slowly and immediately heard a faint sound coming from the closet. It was a whisper. My legs went weak as I approached. The closet door was ajar, and I saw Lily inside, hiding. Her eyes were wide and she looked terrified. I kneeled beside her, whispering, "What's going on?" She didn't say anything. She just put her finger to her lips, signaling for me to be quiet. That's when I noticed we weren't alone. Lily. And I'd just left the social gathering, and the cold night air had already started to wrap around the city. The drive back home felt longer than ever, and the feeling of unease grew with every turn. The silence of the road, broken only by the sound of the car engine, made fear take over me. When we finally arrived home, the last thing I expected to see was a strange man's car parked at the entrance. Fear gripped my chest. This can't be happening, I thought, trying to convince myself there was another explanation, but I knew something was wrong. The house was eerily quiet. When I stepped inside, a wave of dread hit me, like the air had become heavy. "Lily, are you there?" I called out, but my voice sounded hollow with no answer. That's when I found Lily hiding in the closet, her face pale and her eyes wide, staring at me as though she had seen a ghost. She was terrified, trembling uncontrollably. He's here, Ethan," she whispered, her voice faltering with fear. My head spun, trying to understand what she was saying until I looked to the center of the room. That's when I saw him. The man, standing there in the middle of the room, staring at us with empty eyes, expressionless, as if he knew exactly what was happening, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Panic took over me, and instinctively I grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her out of the room. But whatever was happening, it felt impossible to escape. As we tried to run, I heard a loud noise from the window, a dull thud, followed by a knock that made the glass tremble. I looked back and saw the man banging on the car, trying to get in. The sound of his fists hitting the metal was deafening, and I could hear his heavy breathing through the window. Lily and I screamed in panic, locking the doors, but it felt like he was getting closer. The feeling that he wouldn't stop until he got to us was overwhelming. With sweaty hands and a racing heart, I jumped into the car and sped off, aimlessly. The only thought I could focus on was, "We're being hunted," the sound of banging on. The car finally stopped and I accelerated even more, the fear consuming me with every second. Lily was silent beside me, and the emptiness of that chase seemed to stretch endlessly down the road. For a moment I thought the worst was over, until I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man had mysteriously disappeared. There were no signs of him. He was gone, as if he had never existed. The emptiness he left behind was even more terrifying than the chase itself. When we got to the police station, the relief was drowned by frustration. The officer tried to calm us down, but the questions kept coming with no answers. "Do you have any idea who he is?" he asked. But we knew nothing about him, only the feeling of an unknown presence. We did what we could, until we found out that the man, or whatever he was, had found us through a social network, my Instagram. His account had been deleted shortly before we began the chase. He had probably been watching us for some time, and that alone was horrifying. The police couldn't trace him because he had erased all his information and seemed to have vanished without a trace. But the frustration didn't end there. The feeling that he might be out there watching, hunting, following me again was more terrifying than anything. We felt like we hadn't escaped, that somehow he was still out there waiting to make his next move. And the worst part? He knew how to find us with just a click, with a simple glance at our social media. Since that night, paranoia has never left me. Every shadow on the street, every strange noise, a part of me remembers that deep down, nothing is safe. We've changed many things in our lives. Lily and I deleted all our social media accounts. I couldn't take the risk anymore, knowing that any photo, any personal information could be a clue for someone with terrible intentions. And every time I hear a strange noise outside at night, I remember that moment. We might have escaped then, but the fear still lingers in my bones. Lately, something strange has been haunting me and I can barely deal with it. Sometimes when I was trying to sleep in my room, or even when I was just doing something simple like scrolling through my phone with the light on at night, I'd hear a sound. It wasn't a normal sound like the wind or anything you'd expect to hear at night. It was a faint but clear sound, a tap, if you could call it that. It was like something was lightly scraping or pressing against the glass of my window, like an accidental touch. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just some insect flying around, maybe a fly or a spider brushing against the window. But the problem was, it wasn't a one-time thing. The sound came back several times, at least 2 or 3 times a week, and it started to bother me. When it happened, my body would tense up, and I'd feel this strange sensation, something that made me believe there was something more to it. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Then one day I told my dad, Mark, about the tapping. Of course, he told me it was just a normal sound, maybe an insect, and that I was probably overreacting. I even tried to convince myself that he was right, that there was nothing to fear. For a while, nothing happened. No more tapping on the window. But what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of something much more disturbing. A few days later, a message popped up on my phone. It was from someone I barely knew, a guy I'd had a few classes with at school but hadn't kept in touch with. His name was Jake. The message started with a simple, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but we used to have class together." I was a little surprised. I had no idea how he got my number, but I kept reading. "I just wanted to warn you about something I found by chance. I know it might sound weird, but if you haven't seen it, this is pretty disturbing." At the end of the message, he included a link. I hesitated for a moment. Something in my stomach told me not to click, but curiosity won out. I opened the link and ended up on an Instagram page. That's when the tension really started to grow. The account name was J Smith Official, which made me uncomfortable since those were my initials. But what really sent chills down my spine was the profile picture. It was a photo of me. And it didn't stop there. The account was full of photos of me. Photos I had never seen before. They all seemed spontaneous, like someone had taken pictures of me without me noticing. Some were of me at the beach, others in my car, but the most recent ones were the strangest. And then the photos started getting even more disturbing. Some were of me in my own backyard, but the worst ones were the most recent. There were pictures of me inside my room, taken from outside my window. One was of me sitting on the bed, doing homework, another of me texting on my phone, and the worst of all, a photo of me standing in the middle of the room wearing only my underwear. I froze. I couldn't breathe. How were these photos taken? I hadn't noticed anyone there. No one had warned me. The photos were getting likes, and the comments were even more disturbing. Some were compliments, others downright inappropriate. Go ahead. I'd do whatever I wanted. So beautiful. Each comment seemed more threatening than the last. My stomach churned, and as tears began to roll down my face, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Something was horribly wrong, much more than I could understand at that moment. I couldn't think clearly anymore. Fear had taken over me in such an overwhelming way that I didn't know what to do or how to react. It felt like I was being watched all the time, like something invisible was following me, waiting for the right moment to grab me. I was in a panic. Everything made sense now. The tapping on the window, the photos. Someone was watching me. Someone was in my life in a way I couldn't comprehend. And the worst part? I didn't know who this person was. It was then, in the middle of my desperation, that I heard that sound again. The same horrible sound of something scraping against the glass of the window. It was so familiar now, but at the same time more disturbing than ever. My body shook. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. A feeling of dread overtook me, and I began crying uncontrollably. It was like all the terror I had been feeling finally manifested physically. I screamed as loud as I could, louder than I had ever screamed before. I didn't know what else to do. My dad, David, heard my scream and rushed into my room, his eyes wide with worry. He hugged me, trying to calm me down, asking what was going on. But I could barely speak. My body was trembling. My mind was shattered. I grabbed my phone and showed him the Instagram account. "Look at this, Dad. These photos, these messages. I don't know who did this, but someone is watching me." David looked at the phone, his expression one of confusion, which quickly turned to horror. I saw his eyes widen as he understood what I was showing him. He was silent for a moment, just staring at the screen, before his anger exploded. He shouted furiously and ran outside looking for some sort of explanation or maybe even a culprit. He was completely shaken, but didn't know what to do either. When he came back inside, he was already on the phone with the police. I was so lost in my panic that I could barely understand what was happening. David was doing everything he could to make something happen. He gave the information to the police and I was almost dragged back into reality. But even so, I still felt like I was in a nightmare. Everything felt so surreal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was about to happen. The police arrived quickly and I thought that finally, things would be under control. But instead of feeling relieved, a sense of emptiness overtook me. The Instagram account was deleted shortly after the report, but something inside me knew it wasn't the end. There was something much darker behind it, something that couldn't be erased so easily. When the police began investigating, they said they could track down the user of the account. My dad, Jonathan, grew impatient, waiting for answers, but with every minute that passed, the anguish grew. Finally, after a long wait, they discovered that the person behind the photos had used an old iPod Touch to access the account. They managed to track it to the device, but then the situation took an even more bizarre turn. The iPod Touch was destroyed. Or as they said, its Wi-Fi had been permanently disabled. They couldn't trace anything else. The shock was inevitable, and I felt an even heavier weight on my chest. How could someone be so bold? How could someone infiltrate my life like this without me noticing? I looked at my dad, who was clearly frustrated and in shock. His eyes were red and he looked exhausted, as if the loss of control had consumed him. "We're leaving this house, Amy," he said, his tone grave. "We're leaving in a month. We won't take any more risks." The feeling of being invaded by someone so intimately made my skin crawl. The worst part was that there was no way for me to know who it was, or how this person knew so much about me. Since that night, everything has been different. I couldn't trust what surrounded me anymore. I always checked the window before going to bed, with the feeling that someone was out there waiting for the right moment to come close to me again. And while the tapping on the window stopped for a while, paranoia never left me. I was always on edge, always watching the shadows, trying to spot any suspicious movement. I could never see the world the same way again. The most terrifying part, though, was what stayed with me. A constant feeling of being watched, and the certainty that this person was still out there just waiting for the right moment to act again. In the days that followed, the feeling of dread never left me. Even though we no longer heard the tapping on the window, an unbearable sense of surveillance lingered in every corner of my house. I spent sleepless nights, my eyes fixed on the shadows, trying to find some rational explanation for what was happening. But there was no explanation, no sense, just fear, and the worst, uncertainty. The constant doubt about who was behind all of this and what they wanted from me. I found myself staring at the photos on my phone, still disturbed by the idea that someone had taken pictures of me without me knowing. Some were harmless, but others Others felt so personal, so intimate, like someone had been watching me the whole time, knowing every detail of my life. My body trembled every time I went through the images, wondering who could have done this. But the answer remained far away, wrapped in darkness. One night, as I walked down the hallway of the house, I heard a creak behind me, the sound of a door squeaking. A chill ran down my spine. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. The house was empty. Only the feeling of something, or someone, watching me. And once again, the tapping on the window. I could barely breathe, terror flooding every cell of my body. "David, Dad," I whispered, but my voice faltered. He appeared at the door to my room, worried, his face showing the lines of anguish. "Are you okay, Amy?" He always tried to calm me down, but I knew he was just as scared as I was. "I don't know what to do anymore, Dad. I feel like we're being watched. I feel like something's about to happen." He looked at me with a mixture of concern and silent sadness. "I can't protect you here anymore," he said, his words dragging, as if he too was being consumed by the same doubt. "We're leaving here, Amy, soon. We need to go." I knew he was right. There was no safety here anymore. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, fearing that at any moment someone would step out of the shadows. And deep down, part of me knew that no matter where we went, the fear, the paranoia, and the sense of being watched would follow me. There was no escaping that haunting feeling, and nothing would ever be the same again.